That's right, you're losing over a third of the par in the back of your aquarium simply because you painted it black. But how and why does that happen? Does the same loss of par happen if you paint the back of the tank white or blue or light blue? Or what about a mirrored look? This little laser is going to tell us all of the answers in today's BRStv Investigates. I've personally tested the par output for well over 50 aquarium lighting options, and in each test, we always see a band of lower par numbers across the back of our tank, which of course happens to be painted black. Not only is it noticeable at the top of the tank, just 6 inches below the top of the water, but it's even more prominent the further down you go. In an effort to make sure that our light testing procedure is correct and that we are providing you with the most accurate data for you to apply to your own tank, we thought it would be fun to test out other painted background scenarios, including no background at all, white, 3 different shades of blue, and even a mirrored paint surface. What we're going to learn about light reflection, refraction, and the absorption of light will open our eyes into a whole new world of how our reef tank lights act inside the tank, and it just might change the way that everyone paints their tanks from here on out. All right, so before we get to the laser portion, which has to be the coolest part of today's experiment, we first need to test what is happening to the par near the back of a painted tank and if the color choices make a difference. The goal will be to measure the par across 75 points in each tank at the top, middle, and the bottom, all of which using the exact same Kessel A360X at the exact same 8-inch mounting height, and then compare how much par is lost or gained on that back wall. We'll look at this par data from 2 angles. First, how does the different painted colors or shades affect the overall total average par throughout the entire tank? And second, is the loss of par more prominent in that middle and bottom of the tank where a majority of your corals are placed? Looking at the total average par first, the difference between the higher end glass and mirrored back tanks at 112 versus the 101 par at the lower end on the black tank may not seem like much, but in fact that is a 10% loss altogether. One of the more interesting things that I see is just how high the clear, non-painted tank is and how it seemingly acts just like a completely mirrored surface. Another interesting result that caught my eye was how the white and the 2 lighter blue backgrounds performed. Again, I would have thought that white would probably have a higher average since white reflects back all spectrum ranges while black absorbs them. However, we see a slight decrease over the mirror and the clear glass. Now moving on to the comparison for par measurements in the middle and bottom of each tank, specifically those back 2 rows of measurements you see here, which always seem dim in our tests. This is where we start to see even more significant loss of par due to the color and shade differences, where the clear non-painted tank has the highest average of 115 and the black has the lowest at 82, meaning by painting the back of your tank black, you could be losing upward of 28% of par. So this might not be a major issue for reefers who like that rock wall looking aquascape with all of the rocks piled up in the back. However, for NSA aquascape or islands like the BRS 160, all of those corals in the back quarter of the tank are now receiving less light than if they were in front. So the results here are largely the same as what we just saw in total average par, but more pronounced. The clear and the mirrored tanks are nearly identical, while the white and 2 lighter shades of blue are also very similar. But why is that? How could a non-painted tank reflect even more light back inside versus a solid mirror? And why did the white, which reflects all of the light spectrum, lose 19% average par over a clear tank? Well, let's get the laser out and see if we can answer those questions. As you can see behind me, our 7 tanks are now filled with neon green dyed water, and in just a second, we're going to point this high-powered laser inside at the back wall to see what happens to that beam of light inside the tank. Keep on the lookout for any changes to the intensity of the laser beam as it bounces from the back wall down to the bottom and back to the front, which will give you some insight as to which colors or shades are reflecting, which are absorbing, and which are scattering the beam. All right, first let's check out the unpainted versus black tank, which were at the extreme ends of the par testing that we just finished. Immediately, you can see just how strong that reflected beam is in the clear tank versus how dim it is in the black tank after it hits the painted back. Not surprising here since we know that black absorbs light spectrum. However, there is still a faint reflection off the back wall, which is likely more from the inside of the glass versus the outside. Now check out the unpainted tank and the white tank side by side. Again, the reflected beam off the white background is definitely less intense than the clear tank. However, notice the halo around the laser beam on the back of the white tank. What we're seeing here firsthand is the difference between diffuse reflection and specular reflection. So it's true that white does reflect all the light spectrum ranges. However, instead of a mirror that redirects a beam of light at the same angle of incidence from the source, aka specular reflection, the white surface reflects the source of light in all kinds of directions, which is known as diffuse reflection. This is why you see that halo on the back of the white tank and not on the clear, and you can also see the same diffuse reflection on the two lighter shades of blue that were nearly identical in par to that white tank. So that brings up a good question. How many white or light blue tanks have you seen painted in the hobby? Personally, I haven't seen very many, and that's probably due to how hard it is to stay looking clean with a white surface on the back. So that leaves us with two choices, either clear or black, which is the most prominent in the hobby. So for me, it's just gonna come down to the aquascape. If I have a stack of rocks on the back of the wall, this does not matter. However, if I'm thinking about an NSA aquascape or some islands where I plan on putting corals near the back, I just might consider going clear, and if I don't like it, I can always paint the back black later. So the question still lingers of why the clear unpainted tank performed even better than a mirror or any other tank we saw today. It also raises the question of, have we been misled about our light's actual PAR output from somebody who tested it wrong and may have shared the wrong info? Well, Ryan's got the answer to those questions in this BRStv experiment right over here.